Good morning and welcome to the February 27th, 2017 workshop of the Orlando City Council. Commissioners, today we're focused on one of the components of our Greenworks Orlando, which we launched back in 2007. One of our focus areas is water, and we have done an outstanding job with our sustainable water management practices. We reclaim or reuse about 90% of our water that comes from our treatment plants, and Rick Coward is here. We haven't talked about reuse and reclaimed water in a while, but Rick is here to update us on our comprehensive reuse plans. Rick?
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor and Commissioners, it's my pleasure to join you this morning to tell you about our experiences in water reuse. There it is. So I wanted to start with the standard definition. Everybody needs to understand exactly what we're talking about. So water reuse is defined as the process of using wastewater that has been thoroughly treated and disinfected to remove harmful organisms and substances such as bacteria, viruses, and heavy metals, then using it as a source water for other beneficial uses. So you might say, why reuse water? We live in Florida, we're surrounded by water. Why do we need to reuse it? Well, there's an energy savings for using reuse water as opposed to trying to produce more. It provides an improved agricultural production because there are some residual nitrogen and phosphorus loadings. There's environmental benefits to receiving bodies. Typically, our reclaimed water is much cleaner than most of the receiving bodies. Provides groundwater recharge to resupply our drinking water sources. It's sustainable. It's we recycle a precious resource, and it provides conservation of potable water. So a lot of people use potable water for irrigation. This is a much better source, much cheaper as well. And most importantly, it's conserving a non-renewable resource. There's all the water that's ever been created has already been created. And in fact, the Central Florida Water Initiative just a couple of years ago predicted that at current growth rates and current demands, we're going to be about 250 million gallons a day deficit by the year 2035. That is the most important reason to reuse water. A little history on reuse. Not surprising that it started in California in 1929. LA County was used for crop irrigation. In San Francisco in 1932, landscape irrigation, actually in Golden Gate Park. But now Florida leads all states in the nation for the volume of water reuse. Started in Florida in Tallahassee, 1966 for crop irrigation. In St. Petersburg, there was an innovative project called the Dual Water Distribution System for potable water and irrigation. Gainesville in 1977 was used for groundwater recharge. And in Orlando in 1986, we started the Conserve 2 project that used water reuse for crop irrigation and recharge. And in 1987, Iron Bridge was used for wetlands hydration. So we began our water reuse project rather inauspiciously with a 1979 lawsuit against the city in Orange County demanding that wastewater discharges to Shingle Creek be halted. And the city and the county were given until March of 1988 to cease those discharges.
Just as a trivia question, do you know who led the citizens group that filed the lawsuit? Anybody?
Mayor Buddy Dyer?
Nope. It was a mayor, though, or it became a mayor. He was a fishing guide at the time, and it was Jim Swan who became a county commissioner in Osceola and was just finished up his second term as mayor of Kissimmee.
Oh, that's great. I didn't know that either. So the city and the county formed a partnership to develop a joint solution, since we were both included in the lawsuit, with the caveats that all the capital facilities would be owned equally. All the O&M costs would be shared on a flow proportionate basis. And they looked at many alternatives before they decided on what would become Conserve 2. And Conserve 2 is still the largest project of its kind in the world that does citrus irrigation and rapid infiltration for backup, which is groundwater recharge. So Conserve 2 is located in southwest Orlando on McLeod Road. Used to be known as the McLeod Road plant. Service area is in green on the map. So 21 million gallon per day permitted capacity with an actual flow of 13.3 million gallons per day. It's been in service since 1972, was expanded for Conserve 2 use in 1985, and there's been major upgrades from the period 2009 to 2013, and we're expecting a future re-rating of 25 million gallons per day. The effluent discharge, 25% is used for local reuse, over 6,400 residences, 3 golf courses, 57 parks, and 4 schools, and Universal Studios. And 75% of that effluent is taken to the distribution center for agricultural irrigation and groundwater recharge. The Conserve 2 distribution center facility is located in West Orange County, just west of Avalon Road. It services 2 water reclamation facilities, which is our Conserve 2 facility on McLeod Road and Orange County's South Regional system. It's distributed through a 21-mile pipeline through that ranges in size from 42 inches to 54. And the distribution center is comprised of the operations and maintenance facilities, 100 million gallon per day pump station, and 20 million gallons of storage capacity. The 4 tanks you see there are each 5 million gallon volume tanks. So we distribute that further through a 49-mile distribution network of 54-inch pipe to 6-inch pipe and 8 rib sites on 3,725 acres. And we have 72 rib sites, which has 150 individual cells and 25 miles of rib distribution network. So ribs are used when rapid infiltration basins are used when there's periods of wet weather flow, or where the flow exceeds what's needed for irrigation. And they're critical to the future continuation of this project. Our next plant is Conserve 1. Conserve 1 was put in service after Conserve 2, and I cannot explain that, except that I think it was called the McLeod Road plant until Conserve 1 was built. So I don't exactly know how that happened, but Conserve 1 is located just west of the Orlando International Airport, just adjacent to Boggy Creek Road, and it is the pink area on the map. It's a 7.5 million gallon per day plant with currently 3.6 million gallons per day in actual flow. It's been in service since 1987. And it's located in the fastest growing part of the city. 97% of the effluent discharge is used in local reuse with over 4,000 residences, 2 golf courses, 64 parks, 7 schools, and a cooling tower. It also supplies water to the Eastern Regional Reclaimed Water Distribution Systems, which we call ARIDS. And 3% goes to rapid infiltration bases for groundwater recharge. The Eastern Regional Reclaimed Water Distribution System is a way for us to supply the reclaimed water from Conserve One, also Iron Bridge, and the county's Curry Ford Road plant. So it's a regional project. Several partners were involved, developed over a 12-year period with Orange County Utilities, Orlando Utilities, and St. Johns River Water Management District. It's distributed through a 35-mile long pipeline, which ranges in size from 20 inches to 48, 20 million gallons per day capacity, and it's a key water supply initiative for East Orlando and East Orange County, and is the system that supplies Lake Nona and Baldwin Park with their reclaimed water. Iron Bridge is our third plant and our largest by far. It's a 40 million gallon per day design. It's located just north and a little bit west of UCF off of Alafaya Trail. It's a 22.5 million gallon per day actual flow, 10.7 million gallons per day from us. And that's because it's a regional system. It takes water from Orange County, Seminole County, Maitland, Winter Park, Castleberry. It's been in service since 1982. It was expanded to do reclaimed water in 1988. And there's been some major upgrades in 08 and 09. The effluent discharge is 24% to the Little Econ River, 67% to the wetlands, and 9% for local reuse and the ARIDS distribution system supply. So why do we use wetlands? Back in 1988, we wanted to expand the plant, but we're still subject to pollutant loading restrictions. So we had that limited waste load allocation, and the concentration of pollutants at a higher flow would have to be much lower because it's a per pound allotment, not milligrams per liter. So the wetlands treatment system was selected because of its storage capacity and its efficiency in nutrient removal, and at the time was the largest created wetland in the world. It has a 35 million gallon per day capacity with 20 to 40 days residence time, and we're getting 54% removal of nitrogen and 19% removal of phosphorus. And what that says is that the water we are releasing to the St. Johns is much, much cleaner than what is in the St. Johns. So we're actually improving the water quality in the St. Johns River downstream. It now functions as a public park with bike and hiking trails and is a world-famous birding venue. This is the transmission system that gets the water out to the wetlands park. It's a 17-mile pipeline that mostly is located in East, all located in East Orange County. So this is a summary of our reclaimed water quality, and I guess the numbers here are not, well, they're important to us, obviously, but what's really important to note here is that our treatment levels, our actual values, when compared to our permit values, are significantly lower. So we're treating water at each of our plants to such a high standard that I don't believe, well, we rarely exceed our permit values. distribution of the total reclaimed water we produce. 26% of the total goes to wetlands hydration. 38% goes to public access reuse. That's irrigation, typically at residences and golf courses. Agricultural irrigation amounts to 7% of the total. Rapid infiltration, which is groundwater recharge, is 20% of the total. I think that is significant. Surface discharge is 9%. That's to the Little Econ from Iron Bridge. And of the total, we reclaim about 91% of the city's water for use in irrigation, groundwater recharge, and wetlands creation. But I think when you look at the increased flow regimes and the water quality improvements we're doing to the Little Econ, I think we could not discount that 9% of the surface water discharge and say that we recycle almost 100% of what we get sent. I think that's significant. So over the 30+ years we've been doing this, things have changed considerably. Well, in 1985 it was considered a liability. Now it's considered a resource, a commodity that we can sell. We had to incentivize customers to take it. Back in the mid-'80s, we were given 20-year free water agreements to a lot of people, and those have just been expiring the last couple of years. Now customers are more than happy to pay for it. It's a great irrigation source for a lot less money. 1985, it was considered unlimited use as much as you want. Now, I think we need to start to conserve its use. 1985, it was not included in any water supply plans. Now, it's an integral part of all water supply plans. In 1985, it was expensive to implement compared to traditional effluent management. Well, that's easy to see when you just discharge it to a water body or a river to take it away. But now it's considered a cost-effective compared to developing new supplies of water, which is very, very expensive. So some of the challenges we have ahead is to make our distribution system function a little bit better. We need long-term storage facilities in the form of reservoirs. Supplemental supplies are needed for high demand periods, so that means we might have to supplement with groundwater sources. Regional approaches are always going to be more cost-effective and requiring us to enter into more partnerships and possible compromises, although the partners that we've had so far have been tremendous. Further environmental needs and the continued requirement for groundwater recharge. Groundwater recharge is a very important component of reuse. Potential for future regulatory treatment efficiency upgrades. That's always a potential. Conservation and user rates will increase in the future. We expect that conservation will be a big part of that. And then we'll be re-rating probably most of the treatment plants and capacity expansions over the next few years. Thanks.
Rick, what's our projected capacity, or the capacity that we currently have in the 3 treatment plants? What's the projected life of that?
Well, they're all.
I mean, they're all about half capacity, all 3 of them, right?
That's correct. Concert 2 is probably the most over 50% capacity. We're re-rating them all the time. We're expanding and improving systems all the time so that we don't have to spend a lot of money when demand increases to the point where we'd have to do something. So it's kind of a hard question to answer.
I mean, we're pretty well set for decades in terms of wastewater capacity, I would think.
Yeah, I think we're going to re-rate Conserve 2 to 25 million gallons per day. I think that'll take us till 20, 30 years out. Iron Bridge, we've just re-rated a few years ago, so I think we're good there. We're looking at Conserve 1 right now, because that is the area of growth, and we're at 7.5 million gallons per day in permitted capacity, but we're only at 3.6 million gallons per day, so about half. But we feel like there's going to be so much growth out in that area that we probably ought to start looking at increasing the capacity.
Okay. Commissioner Hill, then Commissioner Stewart, then Commissioner Bray.
Thank you, Rick. What a very
Sure.
informative presentation, especially many times I personally think about sustainability. I've always thought about the Greenworks Department, but when we start talking about true sustainability, because we know water is life-sustaining and an amazing job that you're doing down there, so thank you for that. I only had one question, and it's pertaining to the wetlands. How would I be able to arrange field trips for the youth in my district to go out and see that amazing place?
Just call. They're doing that all the time. In fact, we're building right now a wetlands resource center out there to provide education. And they love school groups. They love any kind of youth group out there.
Thank you.
The bird, there we go.
See,
I was just going to say, the bird varieties are pretty incredible out there, including ducks.
That's impressive.
All right, anybody who has not turned off their phones, do so at this point.
Or change your,
Commissioner Stewart.
quack, quack, quack. Sorry, Mayor. Thank you for asking that question, Mayor, because that was the question I was trying to figure out. If we're at a 250 million gallon deficit by 2035, what range and area is that? And that's, is that like the entire Central Florida region?
That's correct. It's the Central Florida, it was the Central Florida Water Initiative, and it's a consortium of St. John's and portions of South Florida and many of the counties in Central Florida. So it's a wide area. But that 250 million gallon deficit was based on projected growth and what the demands are currently. And so it's turned out over the last couple of years that our conservation efforts and the slowing of the growth in population, it's not quite as bad as that projection had predicted.
How cooperative, I guess, we're covering that region, that we've got the 3 regions that we have, and we're doing cooperative work with them. So where's everybody else in the same type of capacity? Are they similar to this? Is the county getting ready to do something big? What's going on in Seminole County? I mean, what happens in such a way that we don't end up having to supplement outside of the area or our service area?
Well, everybody's initializing and continuing conservation efforts, and I think that's the biggest, has been the biggest bang for the buck. It doesn't cost you too much to do it. Everybody is being much more efficient in their treatment, and they're treating to higher levels, and most of them have some sort of reuse system now. So we're reusing the water, offsetting irrigation demands. So in a combination of all those things, I think the Central Florida Water Initiative was successful in bringing this up as a big deal in this area. And I think people have paid attention.
Years ago, we talked about I want to say super water system. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was the idea of being able to process some of this affluent in a way that saves us some area where we haven't got to just put water out on the, or put some of the treated water out. Where are we on that? Is that have we done anything? Is it? It was a great experiment, I think.
Yeah, it
or-
is a great experiment, and really the real benefit of supercritical water oxidation was the destruction of biosolids, not necessarily the creation of reclaimed water, although it would do that as well. So what we were looking to do is get rid of the organics, what the solids that are
Right.
left behind, and then the reclaimed water came along with that. Where we are is sort of nowhere right now. We continue to hope that the Superwater Solutions people will come up with the answers that they need, but it's a very complex project, very complex science, and it's just hard to get it working in a so that it's sustained, so that it's a continuous operation. We can do it in batches, but that's not what we need. What we need is a continuous, because we're producing biosolids all day long.
And it seems that the slowing of the growth and capacity has helped us, so it's not quite so critical. I guess that would be
Well, we're still looking at ways to deal with the solids, because we don't think long-term that land spreading is an application that we want to continue.
Yeah.
So we are looking at ways to do that, and we've retrofitted Concert 2 with a system that allows us to take those biosolids and actually treat it to a little bit higher level and sell it as fertilizer. So
All right.
there's other options.
Yeah.
It's just, this one would have been really nice.
He's talking about sludge.
Sludge, yeah.
Yes, yes.
Biosolids.
Thank you, yeah, that's right. He has nice names for it, too. Thank you, Mayor.
Commissioner Gray.
Thank you, Mayor. Rick, if you go back to your distribution map, I think it's page 5, if you could. As,
Okay.
as Paul Harvey said, now we know the rest of the story. Thanks for the presentation. It's just hard to tell from the handout.
Okay.
Any one of the distribution maps, it doesn't.
Oh, gotcha.
I was curious about, it doesn't look like Vista Lakes is covered. Maybe I didn't see it. There we go. Go back. You just went, there you go.
Actually, the distribution system is here.
Okay.
Is that the slide?
So we are covering Vista Lakes, I guess is the question.
Yes, I believe that's correct.
Perfect. Thanks.
Sure.
That's all I had.
Commissioner Ings?
Oh, I thought the gentleman from Lake Nona had more than one question to ask.
No, sir.
Are you sure?
I'm saving them, sir.
All right, sir. Thank you, Mayor. Hey, Rick, you were talking about wetlands hydration. Can you explain that little concept?
Yes. Wetlands, in order to function properly, need a certain amount of water and a certain amount of water flow through them. So it's biology and oxygenation in the water and so on. So we have to send a certain amount to the wetlands, in this particular case, in the easterly wetlands, to keep it viable. So hydration, I mean, when water levels drop, when there's droughts,
Okay.
wetlands dry out, and when you rehydrate them, you introduce more water.
Okay. And you know, when the big storms come, the heavy rains come, and we've got the water that's flooding the streets and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens with that water, and why isn't it moving as smoothly as it can, and we still have puddles in the streets?
Well, we live in a really flat area, for one thing. I mean, there's going to be some what we call bird baths on the side of the road, but significant flooding typically gets handled in our collection system. Occasionally, we will get rains that far exceed in intensity what our storm system can handle, but in most cases, what you see is a staging up of the water because it just can't get into the system, and then it eventually drains down.
Does that mean we need to expand on the pipes that are?
We design now for 25-year storm, what the intensity of a storm that you would expect every 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's sufficient, but occasionally we just get inundated with a high-intensity storm that just can't handle.
So how do we know when it's time to actually improve upon those particular areas where the capacity is now overwhelming and streets are just flooded out? And especially when you start getting into your arterial streets?
Sure. No, I think when that starts happening a lot, then maybe we need to take a look at what we call our design storm. So if our design storm is not representative of good statistics anymore, then we'd probably want to start looking at that. But I've seen that in some localized areas. I don't think it's a design problem. I think it's probably a maintenance problem.
That's what was going on in certain areas of my district, and your team had to come out and declutter and get some
Sure.
of the leaves and litter out of there, and that's what was going on.
Yeah, well,
in
that
those
happens
baskets.
too. So that's why we have the crews there in place. So, but I don't typically think it's a design problem. It's more like either a maintenance-related problem or a repair problem. I don't think typically a design is the issue.
Okay. You mentioned O&M cost.
Yes, sir.
What are O&M costs, and what does O&M?
Well,
stand for?
operations and maintenance.
Okay.
It's a combination of electrical rates. I mean, it's expensive to pump that much water that far through those larger pipes, and there's just maintenance costs with chemicals and then the operations are. We have a company called Woodard and Curran that runs the distribution center for us, and that's part of the operational costs.
Are those costs incorporated in the reclaimed water cost that goes out to the?
Yeah, but we don't charge enough for reclaimed water even to cover the cost.
Really?
Not even close.
Really?
If I had to guess, I'd say, and it depends on how you look at it, whether we're cleaning the water or we're producing reclaimed water. That's not really our fundamental purpose. Is creating reclaimed water. I would guess $1.50 to produce it if you were thinking of just producing reclaimed water as a commodity, but we don't charge nearly that rate. So it's a market rate based on surrounding counties and Orange County.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, sir, for your presentation. I really appreciate it.
Certainly.
Thank you, Rick. Good presentation.
Thank you.
All right, our second workshop today is going to be on historic preservation. You'll recall a month or so ago, we brought some proposed changes to our historic preservation ordinance. And of course, the city has a number of historic neighborhoods, and there are over 50 local or national historic landmarks. And I thought it'd be helpful to get us all on the same page in terms of the different federal, state, and local programs that we have that support our strategic growth plan, which is recognizing and preserving and celebrating our past and honoring our history. So Richard Forbes, our Historic Preservation Officer, is here to give us a presentation. Richard.
Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. I'm going to give you a presentation here that's going to go over all the things that we've got in Orlando existing, and just sort of make sure that everybody knows what we have been doing and what we do with the historic resources we have today. Of course, this is one of our downtown buildings, the First National Bank building. But just as a little Orlando local preservation timeline, I think it's important to note some of these dates. Our first designation was a National Register designation, and that was for our Church Street station, which is there at on Church Street. First local landmark, which is important to note that, and we'll get into that shortly, that was in 1977, and that was for the Points O'Neill House, which is pictured here, which sits on Lake Cherokee. Now, we really got rolling in 1978 when City Council designated 10 buildings as local landmarks on February 27th. And some of those are what are part of our downtown core and our downtown historic district. But this was obviously a couple of years before we were actually able to have a district So those 10 buildings were protected. We've got a number of landmarks throughout the city. Many of them are in a historic district now, but a number of them also are outside of a district. Of course, some of our more well-known local landmarks and some maybe not so well-known. We've got the train station, which of course has just been renovated. We've got the old OUC building, which was the Phillips Center. Some people don't know about the Fern Creek and the Washington Street Bridge. Those are both historic landmarks and also part of a district at this point. We have the Wells Museum and the Wells House, which are local landmarks and also part of a National Register district. We also have a landmark sign program, and now this gets a little confusing because people think a landmark sign is the same thing as a historic landmark, and that is not actually the case. The landmark signs are iconic signs from our past that under today's codes would not meet code and would not necessarily be allowed in those locations. So this was a way to retain those signs and allow them to continue to exist. Now, there's no protection on these, actually. If the property owner decided they were going to remove that sign, well, they would remove that sign. So that's the little bit of a difference. Some people think, well, it's a landmark, so it must be protected just like any other landmark is protected, but that's not the case for the signs. It's not to say you couldn't take a sign and make it a local historic landmark as well. We also locally protect 6 different districts. We've got our Downtown Historic District from 1980. We've got the Lake Cherokee Historic District from 1981. Again, Lake Cherokee has a great range of historic resources from one of the older houses in town, which is that Points O'Neill house, to some of the Mediterranean Revival houses from the 1920s. Lake Copeland came in 1984. That's located just south of Lake Cherokee. And again, that has some very significant houses from the 1920s, including the house on the bottom is actually one of James Gamble Rogers' houses that he designed here in Orlando. Lake Eola Heights Historic District came along in 1989. And one of our largest local districts. It's got nearly 600 buildings in it, a great range of big craftsman houses. The house on the upper right is the old Otto Freese house from the early 1900s. And then a great representation of all of the different revival styles, including this Italian Renaissance style house that's shown on the bottom. In 1994, we got the Lake Lasona Historic District, and this district is significant. It's also a large district with a little over 500 buildings in it. This one has, you could almost call it our bungalow district. It's got the largest concentration of bungalows, I think, in any of the districts, although the bungalows are found throughout the city. There's a great number of them here. The last local district that we got was Colonial Town South Historic District, and it's significant for its bungalows, its colonial, there's some colonial revival architecture, and since this is the last one that we've done in 2000, included in that were also some of the just post-war buildings that were what we call the minimal traditional or the little colonial revival minimal houses that you see in that neighborhood. So just to talk about the National Register versus local designation. This is a really big and important distinction, and people often get it reversed, but the National Register is honorary. It's a federal program that's administered through the Park Service, but it's entirely honorary, unless, of course, there's federal money or state money that came from a federal source. Then it gets a little muddy there. So locally designated districts and landmarks, the difference here is that they are protected by an enforceable local ordinance and design standards, so that we actually have something on our local books that protects those properties within the district or if they're a standalone landmark. So we do have some National Register districts as well. We've got 6. They range from Griffin Park down south of the 408. We've got Lake Eola Heights Lake Eola Heights is also a local district, but they were so eager in that neighborhood that they actually went ahead and had it listed nationally as well. And the difference is the local district borders are much different than the National Register district. We've got the Holden Paramore district, which is mostly a commercial district that's located along Church Street and then south along Paramore. We've got the Lake Adair, Lake Concord district, which of course is around those two lakes. That's a very significant district, and it has some of the really significant houses from the 1920s land boom in that district. The largest of the National Register districts is Lake Ivanhoe, which has 1,000 properties within its borders. And then there's the little Rosemere Historic District, which had been part of the General College Park areas before the advent of I-4 and cut that off. So just a sampling from those districts. Of course, Lake Ivanhoe has everything from the big, large mansions along the lakes to charming small Tudor revival houses such as this one shown. Rosemere is a very small district, but does have some significant buildings, including Senator Walter Rose's house, which is how all these neighborhoods start with Rose got their name. He was a big developer. And that picture there is the entrance to his house. And of course, I mentioned Lake Adair, Lake Concord. The houses there along the lake are kind of a who's who of well-known architects from that time period. And then the Paramore district has a number of significant buildings in it, ranging from smaller houses that have been converted or still in residential use to some of the commercial buildings, such as this one in the Art Deco, Art Moderne style. We also have some standalone National Register landmarks. Think of the Jack Kerouac House, the Atha House on Smith, Tinker Field. Tinker Field is also a local landmark as well now. And you can see here some of those National Register buildings. It's a little bit overlapping because we have gone ahead and made local landmarks or local districts out of some of these areas. So as you can see, that's the Rogers Building downtown, which is on the National Register, which is also contributing property in our downtown district. So just in historic preservation in general here in Orlando, the purpose of the districts and the overlays is to promote the educational, cultural, and economic welfare of the city by preserving and protecting historic structures, sites, monuments, streets, areas, and neighborhoods which serve as a visible reminder of the history and cultural heritage of the city, state, or nation. So that's really what the underlying basis of what this all is. The Orlando Historic Preservation Board, of course, is one of our citizen boards. It has 9 members, meets the first Wednesday of every month, 4 p.m. right here in council chambers. And our Historic Preservation Board reviews major applications that come before it. And that is for changes to existing buildings and for the creation of landmarks and or districts. Staff has another role with one minor review committee, and that's to review minor applications. So the HPB does have criteria for review. I mentioned that we have landmark and district ordinances that cover everything from additions, how you treat an existing building, new construction, and demolition. And all of those standards are really based on the Secretary of the Interior standards that come from the Park Service, which were created after the Preservation Act of 1966. And in general, you repair rather than replace, you retain character-defining features, you maintain historic fabric of the building and neighborhood, and a lot of the standards are concerned with the context, materials, building materials, massing, scale. And to make things further complicated, each of our historic districts has an ordinance, and each has different review requirements. And this is important to note because the districts, there's a lot of input when a district is created from the property owners. So they kind of get to decide what goes in that ordinance. So what gets reviewed when you're issuing a certificate of appropriateness? Generally, it's any work that requires a permit Now, we don't require permits for certain, like painting, but we do review paint color only in the downtown district and Lake Cherokee districts. And again, I mentioned there's two types of certificates, and that's the minor and the major. The minor is just like it sounds. It's just things that really don't have much of an impact, but we just want to make sure that something inappropriate's not being put on the building. And so those are general repairs, maybe fence, roofing. Picture on the left, I believe that they were in for a minor review because they needed to rebuild their shutters. So fine, no problem. That was a minor review. It was just reviewed by staff and one member of the Historic Preservation Board. A very quick turnaround process, usually done in a day or two. New construction, demolition, and additions to buildings, of course, fall under the major because that's a major change to the structure or the site in case there's an empty site. Believe it or not, we have a number of buildable sites throughout our districts. And every year, that's one of the major things that we are looking at is new construction on what are empty lots, which you might have thought was just maybe a large yard or side yard, but it's actually a platted lot of record. One of the tools we use is the Florida Master Site File. The site files are through the program from the Department of State, the Division of Historical Resources. Whenever we're looking at creating a district or any kind of work is being done via, we got a lot of master site files through the whole I-4 project, but these are created. Generally, it's as much information as you can possibly find about the building, including year built, who built, permit, if we can find it, and a photo. This particular one is of the big Craftsman house that gets used a lot in all sorts of Lake Eola Heights images. This one was created in 1983, of course, years before the district was actually created. So these things take a long time to create because when you're looking at a district, you've got to make sure you've got a Florida Master Site File for every contributing property within that district. We also use the Sanborn fire insurance maps. I think a lot of you saw the 1925 big scale maps that we unearthed last year. They're very helpful. As you can see, there's a lot of color, a lot of codes. There's just a tremendous amount of information that these maps can tell us. In one case, a few years ago, we had a house in Lake Eola Heights that seemed to be missing something. The property owner wanted to add on a porch. Sure enough, we looked at the Sanborn maps. There was a wraparound porch, and sure enough, when they started work, they found the footings for that old porch that had been removed in the 1960s, exactly where it showed on the map. So we were able to help that homeowner recreate that historic front porch. One of the other things that we've been using lately is, of course, you're all familiar with the traditional city, which is this general area of town, which was generally developed before World War II. You can see the color coding here. There's a tremendous number of historic resources within the downtown, or what I call the downtown core, the central core of the city, which is the traditional city. Many of them where you see the highest concentrations of the reds and oranges, those are actually either our local historic districts or our National Register districts. But I always like to show this to people because they don't always understand, that we really do have this tremendous number of historic resources within the city. So, how do we get a district? This is often a lot of confusion here. A lot of people just think that we wave a wand and make a district, which that's not actually the case. It's citizen initiated. Minimum of 15% of the homeowners get to petition to the HPB, and then that's when the work really starts. There's survey work that would be done by staff, hired consultants, boundaries determined. In a case of a district, that review would first go to the Historic Preservation Board, then the Municipal Planning Board, then City Council with all of those public hearings. And then, while it's not required, I don't believe there's ever been a district that was created without the consent of the majority of the owners. Then, of course, the ordinance is written, read, and accepted by City Council. And this is where the property owners get that chance to manipulate the ordinance. And like I said, each one is different. Lake Eola Heights, for example, they wanted all sides of their buildings reviewed. Colonial Town South, if you can't see it, we don't review it. So that's a big, that's a big change. That's a big difference. So there's a lot of opportunity at that point to write that ordinance and with different things.
Craft is a better word than
Craft.
manipulate.
Exactly. So we were talking about contributing versus non-contributing. When you're making a district, you've got to have contributing buildings. Otherwise, what's the point? Obviously, you want the buildings to. There needs to be more contributing than non-contributing. So typically, when we're just doing that first survey, you're looking for 50 years minimum age, which doesn't seem like very much anymore now that I've passed that mark some years ago. Minimally altered, that means that you can still tell what it was, is it bungalows, is it, this, that. I put these two up here because this is of course, in Lake Wasona on East Washington Street, and you've got, right next door to one another, you've got the beautiful 1923 Craftsman bungalow with its traditional open front porch, and then next door you have a building that was built probably around 1972, which of course does not have the same character at all as the buildings in that district. So that gets called a non-contributing property within that district. And so those things are determined while you're doing that survey and you're creating those master site files. Typically you create a master site file for a contributing property, and for the non-contributing you don't. So then we have the landmark program. Currently, and this is of course how we sort of generated this discussion today, was our changes to the landmark ordinance. So right now, any person can nominate to the Historic Preservation Board. The staff report and recommendation goes to the Historic Preservation Board. Then it's reviewed by the Municipal Planning Board. And of course, the minutes from the Historic Preservation Board and the Municipal Planning Board are reviewed and approved by the City Council. And then if they're all approved, then the ordinance is written, read, and adopted by City Council. We've just gone through that process with the Dan House in Dubstred. You'll be seeing the Armory and the Bob Carr coming shortly. They're just all they have left is their ordinance to be read and adopted. So another thing that we do that I think is significant is the historic plaques and markers. These are locally provided individual plaques, such as this. This one's for Beardall, is Beardall Park there at SunTrust. It shows a couple of the old buildings over the years that were there. Another locally provided one, this was at the Joseph Bumby Homestead. These are some of the remaining Bumby descendants. And then we have district entrance markers. This is at Lake Eola Heights. They're probably some of the most elaborate ones. That community went through the Mayor's Matching Grant Program to get these beautiful brown plaques put at the entrances to their districts. And then also since '89 when Lake Eola Heights came to being, they were also very strong in terms of getting the year built plaques put on all the properties. And that was as well in the beginning was part of a Mayor's Matching Grant to get it rolling. Now they just do it through their neighborhood association. And Lake Eola Heights, Lake Wasona, and Colonial Town South all had those programs. Unfortunately, Lake Cherokee and Lake Copeland were so much earlier that that's kind of hit or miss. Some people have put them on their houses themselves, which we will help them and tell them what year should be on there if they're interested in doing that. We also, a couple of years ago, did the Downtown Development Board's Downtown Marker Program, which we put up a number, I think 25 bronze plaques on 25 significant buildings throughout the downtown. This happens to be the one for the Angebilt Hotel. Now we also, there's another program which is, I think, a very good program, is the Florida Historical Markers Program. And this is a public awareness program through the Division of Historical Resources. It recognizes historic resources, persons, events. And this goes through the State Historical Marker Council, which is all part of the Division of Historical Resources. And the cost is about $2,200, and this is an example from one a couple of years ago with the Epstein plot. at Greenwood Cemetery. Of course, this is the most recent one that we've done, which was just a few months ago at the Atlantic Coastline or Amtrak station. And we have several more of these coming up. We've got Tinkerfield is getting a pair of them because it's such a large site. We're putting matching ones at either end, and then we also have a couple more in the works. So we also have some preservation organizations. Now, I'm just going to start from the top kind of down here. The National Trust for Historic Preservation was created after the Preservation Act of 1966. That's the national arms, private, education is one of their main goals. They do own certain properties. More locally in Florida, we have the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation, which has been in since about 1975. It's based in Tallahassee. It has regional board trustees around the state. Happened to be one for our Orlando area. I've been fortunate enough to be on the trust board for about 6 years now. Hopefully, I think it's time for me to roll off of that soon. And then we have locally, we have a fairly new group. In the past we had Old Inc., which disbanded back in the 90s, but now we have Orange Preservation Trust, which is a local group that advocates for preservation and also educates. And I know we have two members from Orange Preservation Trust here today. Joy Dickinson and Sheila Ratliff are here representing Orange Preservation Trust. And then, of course, we have the State Division of Historical Resources. They're the ones that run that State Historical Marker Program, the Certified Local Government Program, of which Orlando has been a member since the 1980s. And they also provide limited historic preservation grants. And I say limited because you never know how much is going to be budgeted for that. It's very tough to count on a grant because you can go after it and then it may not get funded. But they do exist. So we also have local history organizations. We have the Orange County Regional History Center, and Dr. Adam Ware is here today from the History Center. Under that umbrella, they have the Historical Society of Central Florida and the Orlando Remembered group. Orlando Remembered is a group that was put together to help remember certain key places in Orlando that may no longer exist. Of course, the UCF History Department has a lot of programs, one of them being the richest program, which is oral history. We have the PAST, which is the Preserve African American Society History and Tradition, Inc., and that, of course, is the Wells-built museum and house there on South Street. So when we talk about protecting historic resources, the way we do it here in Orlando is we have that local historic district, and that provides protection through an ordinance and standards. And a historic district is just more than one, essentially. You could have a very small micro district of 2 buildings, or you could have, like Lake Eola Heights, you could have 600 or more buildings. But contiguous is the key word there. So then we have our local historic landmark program, and that is a standalone structure or site. There's just one, because if it was more than one, you'd probably call it a small district. One that we have talked about that we do not have here in Orlando yet is the Conservation District. And this would, some places consider this historic preservation light. It's an overlay that is a possibility here as well. If you think of our traditional city overlay or some of the overlays we're looking at for Colonial Town North, those sort of maybe start to approach that, and these are more concerned with maybe scale, mass, and such, and demolition to a degree, rather than the full gamut that the Historic Preservation Board looks at, from the windows to the doors and all those small details. This is maybe more of a broad, what you're looking to do here is protect a whole district that maybe by its scale, maybe you make sure all the houses are 1 or 2 stories and not more, certain things like that. A lot of possibilities there. That's, again, another tool that's in the box that other communities have used in other places, but we have not yet. So, of course, the honorary with no protection, which is still significant. You have the National Register, which is both which is an individual listing, And then you have the National Register, which is a district, which is, again, same thing, contiguous properties. And then, of course, you've got the historic plaques and markers that I talked about. Now, this provides information and a sense of place. So these all have a use for us, even though that they really provide no actual protection to a building. Then there are financial incentives. The biggest one that the National Register provides is the federal tax credit for historic preservation. And this varies between 10 and 20%. If you think of the Aloft Hotel, that building was put on the National Register, and it was put on our local landmarks list. And that project really was possible because of these tax credits. And then we have our local ad valorem tax exemption. This is for contributing properties in our districts or landmarks. And that one is, if you're going to renovate a building, and let's say the building is valued at $100,000, and let's say in one of these cases you put another $150,000 or $200,000 in it, you've raised the taxable value. Well, this program freezes your taxes at that earlier unimproved number for 10 years. So, and that's just for the local Orlando portion of the taxes. We've also got some facade grant programs within our CRA. We've got we've all seen some of the ones. You approve them when you are working with those programs. We've approved some in our historic district fairly recently. We had programs in the past. We had a previous program that was a revolving loan fund that helped with cost of renovations to designated historic properties. And that helped out with things. You know, sometimes things can be a little more expensive if you're going to do it exactly the way it should be in terms of keeping the historic character, and so that would help defray that. And there are intangible incentives. Of course, there's the sense of place, and there's the pride of place. I mean, many of our districts were in really terrible shape when they went through the districting process. Think Lake Eola Heights and Lake Lasona. The houses were in disrepair. There was a lot going on that was not good. And so one of the things that happened here is it created this pride of place. And of course, today they're some of our most sought after neighborhoods. And this one is not really intangible, it's very tangible, is actually the location. So many of our historic resources are very close to downtown, and that is where people want to be. And is it because they're downtown, or is it because of the pride of place and the sense of place and the old buildings and that? So I put this on here. This is what got us here to this discussion today when we were talking about the landmark ordinance changes. So Kyle might want to talk about this a little bit. We're refining that landmark ordinance. The next steps would be to follow up with you all and then bring that back at some point in the future back to council for approval.
Okay, we did first read on it, didn't we?
Right.
So we're
Yes, sir.
between first and second read, and I think the primary issue was Commissioner Hill had a concern on the removal of anyone being able to ask for the designation of a historic landmark. So Commissioner Hill, do you have a question at this point?
Yeah, there was a few things. I think it, as you stated, Mayor, it was needing permission from the owners, which, as you stated here, 15% of the home ownership would need to ask about making something a historic site. And we know the city of Orlando and many investors are the
Commissioner,
major.
that's to create a district.
District, exactly. I'm going there.
Okay.
I'm going there. Because I think you said the National Registry, we have that in Paramore, but there's no protection. And that was my major concern, is there not being any protection on some of the historic properties there in Paramore, and coming up with a solution. As we know, the revitalization that's going on in the Paramore area, the property value is increasing, and I'm concerned that the investors will oversee history in Paramore for profit. So I want to secure that. And have we possibly done the inventory that I think the mayor requested there in the Paramore area so we can identify some of these?
And in terms of the inventory in the Paramore, we have that pretty, I'd say, well nailed down. We've got the National Register District, which was exhaustive and comprehensive, and we have a list of every building in that district. But as you saw, that's a very small portion of the Paramore area. Now, there's also hundreds and hundreds of other Florida master site files on properties. But in that case, they were made just because the building was over 50 years of age. So at that point, then, the community needs to say, well, are they just old, or are they old and important? But I think that what Kyle is coming up with in terms of the rewrite of the ordinance solves a lot of that issue. I think it's very fair so far what I've
Can I
seen.
just say something? All the properties in Paramore is important to the people of Paramore. They just don't own the property in Paramore. So I think it's up to us, in fairness, with the renters and the communities, having a few meetings, what is important. But, so I just wanted to clarify that.
Right, and that, I didn't mean that they're not important, but, when you look at a historic property, there's a number of reasons why it might be important to the community. One is just simply the architecture of the architect, and it's who
understand.
lived there, that kind of thing. And those are the things that we don't necessarily know unless the community comes forward and says, oh, that was, someone's house that is very important to the community. And those are the things that are a little bit trickier to find out because
Walter, are you helping with gathering that information still? Thank you. Go ahead, Kyle.
The only thing I was going to add is just to remind you all what the mayor just said is that we're between first and second reading on the landmark ordinance. Now, keep in mind that that ordinance that we brought you related only to the Orlando landmarks. It did not make or propose any changes to the districting process. Remember, and that was one of the reasons that we had today's presentation, was to make sure that everybody understood the difference between an individual landmark and an historic preservation district. If there are changes to be made to the historic preservation district process, that's something that we can take up upon your instructions. What we plan to do is bring back a new ordinance, landmark ordinance, not at today's council, but at the next council meeting. We had to have time to advertise it for second reading. And we've come up with a few ideas that we think will give you the opportunity to protect the buildings that the community finds important in Paramore. We are going to be scheduling time with you over the next week or week and a half, not just you, Commissioner Hill, but all the commissioners, to get your feedback and make sure that we're on the right path. But I think we have some neat ideas.
Okay, great.
Commissioner Stewart?
Yeah, I'm still confused, so just to make sure that I understand. And really, the question is, once we determine a landmark, and I understand the issues about trying to do it over really kind of the objection of the owner, we want to try to, that's understandable. But once I determine a landmark, once Dr. Dan's house is determined as a landmark, what can you do to it? Is it now required that any changes to that now must come through HBB?
correct.
Just
It
that-
becomes like a building in a district.
Okay, so
There's
it
the
could-
major and minor certificate
same thing.
So if they wanted to build a fence, they'd get a minor certificate. If they want to
Okay.
get a new roof, minor. If they want to make an addition, we go through the
Okay.
board process
So
to
it
make sure that it's
it
appropriate.
takes an individual property and does what our HBB does on historic districts.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
So now you end up with this national, this is where the challenge, I get the confusion. You have this national registry for 3 parts of College Park, if you want to call it that. What happened, I think they think they're protected.
No, they're
And they,
not.
and they really aren't. And so you end up with houses being torn down, mini mansions coming up, and whatever else may happen along there.
Yes.
How do you, I guess, how does that kind of balance to where we are?
Well, that's a difficult one because, like you said, a lot of people think, oh, we're protected, we're part of this National Register District, but again, it's honorary. Plaque programs and year-built programs can help because it remind people, oh, I live in this house, it was built in 1925, and it's
Yeah.
fantastic. It's not unheard of that a National Register district, because of some threat to the neighborhood, other demolitions, has become a local district, but, you know, that, I don't know how we would, that's a tough process,
Yeah.
because it tends to pit, you know, neighbor against neighbor, some are for, some are against. If you notice the outline of the Colonial Town South District, it does this, and that's because people were opting out and saying no, and then, you know, trying to get a district that was contiguous was very difficult. But that's the difficulty with the National Register, is
Yeah.
it's not,
At the same time, on the National Register, we take 1,000 houses in College Park, and all of a sudden stuff happens down the street, and they're going, wait a second, you can't do that, we're a National Registry. And she says, well, yeah, we can, it's kind of honorary, thanks a lot for asking. I mean, that's kind of what it is, right? So it becomes a real challenge, and I guess,
it does become a challenge.
and I guess what I'm kind of looking at is, how do you get, go back to the HB Light, the overlay district. Maybe there is something we can do where that kind of raises its bar. When you want to take a bungalow that's 60 or 70 years old, that probably ought to maintain some of its character, and then you tear it down and you build a 4,200 square foot house, and all of a sudden it's like, that's not the character of the neighborhood, but at the same time, we want to let guys do what they can do.
Yeah, it's a difficult conundrum.
When you look at the overlay district, is that overlay district a citizen-generated district, much like the historic district? Or
Not
is that-
necessarily. It's just similar to any kind of overlay district that we would put on an area, and we've got quite a few of them. You know, we've got special plan areas, and Colonial Town North has a special plan.
Yeah.
We're looking at special restrictions on, or duplexes and all of that, that could all kind of be even considered a conservation district, but
Yeah.
the conservation district typically is geared towards preserving as many historic buildings as possible, but it's really doing through sort of a neighborhood, like collective, like everything, you know, not just one house at a time, but the whole neighborhood in terms of scale and massing and materials.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to you about, because I think the idea of having some other way to kind of review when somebody starts to tear a building down ought to be,
Yeah.
I'm torn between it, because I want to give them the rights, but I also don't want to end up in doing much of the challenges you have with the HPV, is that we're reviewing what the frame of the window is. I mean, seems that that's probably a little bit too much for a larger conservation or larger overlay district, you know? But I'd love to kind of talk with that some more.
And there are a number of communities that have done that successfully. Again, it's what is the goal?
Just to create a layer that
Yeah.
says we want to maintain some of that. All right, thank you very much, I appreciate it. Thank you, Mayor.
Commissioner Ortiz?
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Forbes, thank you for your presentation. Quick question. Besides the 50 years minimum age and minimally altered, there's any other elements to become a historic district? And the reason I ask you is because we have Lake Barton, Monterey, Englewood. These are neighborhoods that are becoming of over 50 years of age. And some of those houses over there, those residents have not been altered in many years. So what would it take for them to become historic?
Well, of course, you'd need, for a true historic district, you would need that 15% of the residents or property owners to get together and say, we would like to explore this, and here's our petition. And then at that point, we would begin to look at what potential boundary might be. And if that's the case, you know, was this area built, it's called, you know, a particular neighborhood, you know, maybe the boundary is here to here, and that was what would start the process. It gets a little bit trickier in some of the newer, or like post-war neighborhoods, because you ended up having a subdivision built like by, say, the same developer, and all the houses are the same. So then you're kind of like, well, architecturally they're maybe not that significant, but maybe there's another reason that that's worth protecting, maybe the planning aspect of it, the neighborhood aspect of it. So there's a whole different group of ways that you can look at a district or a landmark. And we've even There are times when it's a significant enough building that it's not 50 years of age when we've protected it. But generally, 50 years is just the benchmark.
Okay. But besides those two items, there's any other elements to this?
Well, I mean, there's so many other things that can fall into play, like maybe there's well-known people that lived in the neighborhood, or there's something happened there. I mean, there's a lot of different elements that can go into it, but the basic is just the age of the building, and is it, minimally altered.
Because we
Is
still
it-
have a lot of people that have lived there from when the houses were built. I mean, and I'm talking about 50, 60 years. So as time has gone by, I've been looking at what's been transpiring in the city, and I was wondering when were these areas going to become historic, in essence. So that's just, I guess, speculating that maybe in the near future they may be able to do something like this.
Well, certainly if there was support in the neighborhood, it could
I-
certainly be done.
If that's the case, I would like to, explore the possibility of you coming over and talking to our community. We have the Neighborhood Leaders Council, just, put that thought in their minds to see what happens.
Be glad to.
Thank you, boss. Appreciate it.
Commissioner Ings?
Thank you, Mayor. And Richard, those are the lines that I was thinking on too, and I know we've had conversation before, especially concerning Washington Shores, that particular neighborhood, and what it sounds like now is really trying to come together with that community. So I guess my question was, how do you help local communities to organize and recognize its historic values and creating a local ordinance?
Well, it's really a grassroots effort that there really has to be support in the neighborhood. It doesn't work from the top down. It's got to be from the neighborhood up, because otherwise it just doesn't work.
Well,
But I've been to Washington Shores and
Right.
given a presentation on just that very
15.
issue some years ago. But we would help
Yeah.
in whatever, if any questions they have, any information we can provide them, we would certainly do that, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's time for us to probably recircle the wagons and come back together, reference this issue. Because not only Washington Shores, but the Holden Heights area, I think they have some designations there in Holden Heights, which is south of Gore Street, as a historic area, or
No, there isn't any.
there's some
Well,
markers. I'll take a picture
Well, there
and
may be
send it to you.
markers. Again, the markers would be one of those ways that you educate people about their surroundings.
Okay, because in that Holden Heights area too, we've got one historic building that's 92 years old, and that's the Grand Avenue Elementary School building.
And that is one of our local historic landmarks.
Okay.
Both
see,
Princeton and Grand are on our list.
I didn't see a picture in our presentation, so.
Well, we have so many I couldn't show
Well,
you.
hey, I want to be represented too.
But
But,
Princeton Elementary and Grand are both on our landmarks list. They were both by the same architect, and they're actually mirror images
Yes.
of the same school.
And and there's such rich history on that, especially with the developer there and what he did specifically for Orlando. So that's just truly remarkable. I do appreciate what you do, and I know you're a very hard-working person, and I know you really care about historic preservation. So thank you so much for this presentation this morning. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Ortiz, follow up.
Thank you, Mayor. One more question, because we have Englewood Elementary is being taken down, and I just thought of this. That school is probably older than 50 years of age, and the shape of that building is unique. Is like a pentagon, and then it has these other buildings around it. And some of the neighbors were complaining about that school being taken down because it has such a historic value to our community. And now that I'm thinking of this, I wonder if there's a possibility, not that we want to go now head-to-head with the school board, but if there is some value to that, if this is a building that we might be, could be considered as of historic value, like such.
Well, we'd certainly could look into that. I know we have a relationship with the Orange County
I know. It'll be
school
a-
board is, they believe that they're, don't require or don't have to abide by our
Yeah,
rules, but I think there's some disagreement about that. in a
How would
statewide
that go
level.
about?
Well, the school district believes that there's a state statute that exempts them from local historic preservation review.
Keyword, they believe?
They believe.
Okay.
They have historically come in for work like to Princeton and voluntarily, in their words, gone through the historic preservation process, but the entire time maintaining that they didn't actually have to do that, and it was a courtesy that they were doing it.
Commissioner, we don't win very many fights with the school district. It's always about the kids.
Well, the reason I ask is because I had a lot of neighbors coming to me about this, and I said, hey, these are two government institutions. The school board has their own, form of government, and, the worst transaction is the one that you don't do, so I'm asking if
Yeah.
there's a possibility, maybe. I don't know.
Well, the mid-century buildings are hot properties right
But
now,
it's,
so.
back in the days, that particular building, Englewood Elementary, won some sort of prizes for the unique style. And so now there's a bunch of residents a little concerned and aggravated with the fact that the school is going down. And it's a little too late because the other one has been built already, so, but it's interesting.
Richard, does Orange County have a designation program of any sort?
They don't have a preservation program currently. I know that they have been, for some years now, have been looking into that as to what to do with that, because they're such a broad group. They've got so many communities that are out in, unincorporated Orange County that have nobody to turn to if they have an issue. And that's one of the things that Orange Preservation Trust has been trying to help some of those communities. But I know that they sent a couple of people to a workshop that I gave through the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation, and they indicated that they were looking at hopefully maybe coming up with something in the near
I'm
future.
just thinking of, I don't know who owns it now, but Irby Pugh's house down in Fort Gatlin, I think is one of the older houses, if not the oldest house in Orange County, and I don't know if it has any designation of any sort.
It wouldn't if it's in unincorporated Orange County.
Yeah, okay.
Mayor, just as a quick reminder that Princeton Elementary is celebrating their 90th birthday in 2 weeks.
Excellent.
So I was there at the very beginning.
My father went to school there at the very beginning.
I went to school there, but I was there long after it opened up.
My father was there not long after it opened.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
For the presentation. So that will conclude our workshop for today.